Vic Mullen, the grumpy old Scotsman. I know it's not. Hold on, Vic. Why have you still got your Christmas decorations up? I'm a traditionalist, so the decorations come down on the 12th night, and this happens to be the 12th night. January the 5th, the 12th day of Christmas. Tomorrow's Epiphany, which is January the 6th. So once this video is done, the decorations are being taken down. I just thought I'd do the video first. So there was a poll that was made. I think this was a couple of days ago, and the results of this poll has been very interesting. It's also made the SNP literally crap themselves. So let's just bring this in, shall we? So Reform UK's light blue, yellow's the SNP, they've taken up a big chunk of Scotland. Conservatives are dark blue. They're down there. I'm surprised the Conservatives have actually got anywhere. Labour have got one seat right in the middle. That's central Glasgow, where they were bound to get. Plaid Cymru, that's down in Wales. Liberal Democrats is up here. Highlands and Islands, the Liberal Democrats have always done well in the Highlands and Islands. You've got Orkney and Shetland Islands over here, and you've got the Highlands and the Outer Hebrides up here. Independents, Green, I don't think there's any Green there. Yeah, there's no Greens. The interesting part about this is Scotland itself. Right, so that down there, where am I? Hi. That down there, which is, you can't see my mouse, why am I pointing at it? It's like, follow my finger, right? And you've got, in fact, it'd be easier if I did this. Did that, right, so, right, wrong side, Vic. Right there, right? If you just follow my finger there. You've got the yellow blob island, which is the island of Arran, and then you've got that little bit of Reform sitting by itself, surrounded with the SNP. That's where I live. That's Ayrshire. That's where I live. That's Ayrshire, and I was rather surprised that Ayrshire would end up turning Reform. Now, here's the thing: if you look at that map of Scotland and you look at the this area, where's that wrong side, Vic? It's the north east coast, right? Northeast coast. So kind of in line with where my head is right now. That large chunk of Reform lead blue right there, that's the northeast coast, and it's that whole area which is essentially the basis for the oil industry in Scotland, well, the UK as well, but in Scotland, that's where Aberdeen and all that is. A lot of the oil workers and a lot of the oil infrastructure is based around those regions, and it turns out that Reform is taking big chunks of that area as well. They've also got a couple of light blue areas along the central belt, including the west coast central belt where I'm living as well. They're going to be in second place. They're going to be in second place. Even though the Liberal Democrats have got large chunks of the Highlands and Islands, the Highlands and Islands are huge constituencies, massive constituencies. But if you look at where Reform is, right, they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 constituencies. And even though the Liberal Democrats with their orange have got a lot of orange, they've got Shetland Orkney, that's 2, Northern Highlands, that's 3, Upper Highlands, Inverness, that's 4, that little chunk down from Aberdeen, that's 5, and that one, that's 6, 7, 8. So they've got 8. Again, Highlands and Islands, massive constituencies and land area, but there's not a lot of people living there because it's mostly mountainous regions up there. So yeah, we're going to be looking at, if this poll, if a general election was to happen right now, you'd be looking at Reform having a 381 seat majority in the House of Parliament, which means a clear majority of anywhere between 101 to 115 seats in the House of Commons, which means if all of the backbenchers of a reform-led parliament all voted in line with the whip and with Nigel Farage, anything Farage wanted would be passed. Literally anything he wanted would be passed, because he's got an above 100 seat majority in the House of Parliament. The surprising thing was that map of Scotland. Now, I knew that Reform was making inroads in Scotland. Now, obviously, if you look at that map, the bulk of it is in yellow. It's the Scottish National Party. The bulk of it is still in yellow. But the SNP have been losing ground, not just to Reform, but to the Liberal Democrats across the Central Belt. The SNP's majority has been thinning out for the past 10 years, the last 2 election cycles. The SNP's majority across the Central Belt has been thinning out, and it's the Central Belt. In other words, Glasgow, and then everything east of Glasgow and everything west of Glasgow. That whole Central Belt line, from where I am, on the west coast of the Central Belt, all the way to the east coast of the Central Belt, that's where the bulk of the major constituencies are. Because if you look at this map of Scotland, and you look at that orange blob with the red Labour blob right in the middle, that is the Central Belt of Scotland. And you can see tiny boundaries in there. Tiny boundaries, very small constituencies compared to the likes of the Highlands and Islands that have got massive landmass constituencies, because the bulk of the population in Scotland is spread across the Central Belt, and because Glasgow and the Greater Glasgow area is also in the Central Belt, along with Ayrshire, North Ayrshire, along with Renfrewshire, all the way through Glasgow and then heading over to the east coast of the Central Belt. There's much more smaller boundaries there. If the SNP's chokehold on the Central Belt is broken, and if you look at this map, Reform's already making inroads on the eastern Central Belt. The Liberal Democrats are making inroads on the northern Central Belt, that's north of Glasgow. Labour's got a seat, that's that red blob in the middle. Labour's got a seat in central Glasgow, and Reform have made inroads on the west coast of the Central Belt. They're being eaten away very, very slowly. Very slowly. And this is why the SNP, along with the Labour Party, have been constantly attacking Nigel Farage. You look at the SNP's Facebook page, you've got John Swinney attacking Nigel Farage, saying that Farage is a Russian asset. It's the same trick that what's-her-face Hillary Clinton done with Donald Trump during the run-up to her election loss. John Swinney's trying to play the same playbook. You know, Nigel Farage is friendly with Russia. You vote Nigel Farage, you're going to get Putin ruling over the UK. The same old trick that far-left communist nutcases generally tend to do. And guess what? The Scottish National Party is basically full of communists. They are. Look at what they're doing with Ardrossan Harbour. Ardrossan Harbour, which needs some infrastructure work from Peel Ports, which is the private company that owns Ardrossan Harbour. Peel Ports went, nah, we're not doing this. Why? Because Peel Ports knows if they refuse to do the work of deepening Ardrossan Harbour to get the new ferries in, what's the SNP going to do? Oh, well, we'll just buy that from you then. They're nationalising it. They're nationalising Ardrossan Harbour. So me, you, if you're in Scotland watching this, me, you, and everyone else in Scotland is going to have to pay to keep Ardrossan Harbour up and running, because it's now going to be nationalised under the SNP. And this is the problem the SNP's always had. You've got the Labour Party, which set up the national health system back in the very early 1950s, that gave us free education, that set up in the early days a nationalised British Steel, a nationalised gas system. But the thing is, if you go too far down the road of socialism, which is what the Labour Party started to do, Every failing industry, like British Steel, this is the video that I talked about, the last video that I popped up, every failing industry ends up being an albatross around the government's neck. And who pays for that albatross? Me and you. This is why Margaret Thatcher decided to sell off vast swathes of the old nationalised industries, because she knew that if British Steel, British Gas, the Post Office, British Telecom and all the rest of it was all paid for by the taxpayer, when those industries collapse, they take Britain down with it. Because suitcase after suitcase after suitcase after suitcase of cash is not going to help an industry or a business whose basic foundation cannot make money. And that's the problem with Ardrossan Harbour. That's the major problem with Ardrossan Harbour. Not only does Ardrossan Harbour need tens of millions of pounds of infrastructure work, the whole site needs to be essentially just flattened and rebuilt from the ground up. It's been the biggest problem with Ardrossan Harbour since the very, very late 1980s. With these new ferries, which has been an ongoing sore point for the SNP, but with these new ferries being produced, Ardrossan Harbour does not have the infrastructure to actually capably manage these new ferries being used to actually go to the Isle of Arran and the Outer Hebrides, which is why Peel Ports basically pulled back and said, we've not got the money for this. I mean, not only do we need to spend the better part of 10 to 20 million pounds redoing the entire Ardrossan Harbour area, there is still no guarantee that even if the harbour is deepened, even if the infrastructure is brought up to spec, there is no guarantee that Peel Ports would have made the money back from that investment. Because guess what, folks? Ferry takings are down. And they've been going down for a very long time now. Very long time now. So now you've got the SNP wading in and basically taking over Ardrossan Harbour and running it under the nationalisation scheme. Now at the same point in time, everyone in Scotland who's looking at the whole debacle that's going on with the ferry thing and the whole debacle that's going on with Ardrossan Harbour is sitting there thinking, well, hold on a minute, SNP. I'm living in Largs, which is a small town just up the road from me, or I'm living in Bensley Village, another small town just up the road from me, or I'm living in Kilwinning, or I'm living in Ardrossan, where the port is, or I'm living in Saltcoats or Stevenson. We've got crumbling infrastructure here. We've got main roads that are littered with potholes. We've got high streets that are dying. We've got knife crime that's up. We've got drug abuse that's up. And what are you going to do with that extra 15% via the Barnett formula? Take over a failing harbour. Now you see why Reform UK is making major, not just Reform for that matter, the Liberal Democrats as well. Now you see why Reform and the Liberal Democrats are now making inroads in the Central Belt. And if the SNP lose the Central Belt, SNP will essentially lose the majority standing in the Holyrood Parliament. And the fact that not just the Lib Dems, but Reform, because this is basically their first election cycle up here in Scotland. This is going to be their first election cycle. Not just the Lib Dems, but Reform are nibbling away at the edges of the SNP stranglehold. Basically means that John Swinney has got to take a very, very close look at why people are turning away from the SNP. But here's the problem. John Swinney's an idiot. Anything John Swinney touches immediately turns into a steaming pile of excrement, because that's the kind of person John Swinney is. He has got zero, literally zero political clout within the SNP itself. He has no idea what's going on half the time. Lately, on the SNP's Facebook page, instead of talking about the basics like the economy, instead of talking about the basics like healthcare, instead of talking about the basics like basic infrastructure, people are complaining about the potholes. What's John Swinney harping on about since New Year? Oh, we need another independence referendum. For the love of God, seriously? We need another independence referendum. Scotland would be brilliant on its own. No, it wouldn't, John, not under the SNP, because here's the thing, the Westminster devolved parliament that you lot in the SNP are currently running have absolutely bankrupted this nation. Even with the extra 15% money from Westminster being thrown at you lot in the SNP, what do you do with it all? You waste it. Oh, let's buy Ardrossan Harbour, even though the entire Ardrossan Harbour project is doomed to failure, because Troon Harbour is a lot more better equipped than Ardrossan is. But you lot don't want to face up to the facts. You don't want to face up to the facts. Let's buy Ardrossan Harbour. Let's spend 10, 15, 20 million pounds levelling the whole area, deepening the harbour out, and then building a new harbour for the new ferries, only to find out that by the point in time that Ardrossan Harbour's actually finished, could be anywhere from 5 to 10 years from now, the infrastructure would have already been built in Troon. So you're basically going to take away all the investment that the private harbour owners in Troon are doing and then transplant that over into Ardrossan that the Scottish Government owns. If I was the owner of Troon Harbour, I would sue you. Unfair competition. Literally unfair competition. You're throwing taxpayers' money at a nationally owned harbour, and you're taking business away from a privately owned business in Troon Harbour where the ferries are now going. If you were to do that and I was the owner of Troon Harbour, I would sue you, John Swinney. I would sue you to hell and back. I would bankrupt the SNP. That's what I would do. Unfair competition. Unfair competition. But it's John Swinney, people. He's as thick as two short planks, as the saying goes up here in Scotland. But the fact that this is happening, that the Lib Dems is getting a couple of extra more seats, but more importantly, that Reform is getting... Hold on. No. I've got the wrong picture. Hold on, it's that one. Need to get rid of you. Why are you coming back up again? Need to get rid of you. There we go. The fact that Reform is making major inroads, not just in the Central Belt, but also in the north-east coast, where all the oil is, all the oil towns in Aberdeen, for that matter. The fact they're making inroads up there not only surprised me, but it's probably surprised a lot of people in Scotland. I thought maybe Reform would get 1 or 2 seats in the Central Belt, and maybe they'd steal a couple of seats off the SNP on the East Coast. But the fact that Reform have made this amount of inroads, and we're still, 2.5, 3 years away from an actual general election, that says a lot. It says a lot. And that poll was taken just after New Year. Just after New Year. Wow. Just wow. No wonder all the SNP can talk about, apart from independence, but all the SNP can talk about is attacking Nigel Farage. They're just ignoring the Tory party now, and they're ignoring Labour, because the SNP know, and as that picture showed, the Tory party and the Labour party are basically dead up here now. They're dead. But the SNP know that their biggest rival is now going to be Reform. And they are terrified with what Nigel Farage has been saying, with what he's going to do with not just the Scottish Parliament up here, but the Scottish budget. They are terrified of what would happen if Farage actually gained entrance into number 10 and became the next Prime Minister. They're even more terrified of what would happen if Reform actually got such a big foothold in Scotland that Reform would actually run the Scottish Parliament, with the SNP being kicked down into official opposition status, because Reform would basically unravel 20 years of waste and 20 years of utter mismanagement that the SNP have done up here. And the thing about Reform, they would make it all public. They would literally make it all public. Look at all this money the SNP's wasted. Here's all the paperwork for you. Have a read. That's exactly what Reform would do. And this is why the SNP are currently terrified. Terrified. But yeah, it looks as if not just the next Holyrood elections coming up in May, but it looks as if the next general election is going to be a very, very interesting one for Scotland.